Hello and welcome to another episode of the Strength Syndicate podcast with myself, Shane Story, and as always, my co-host, Lawrence King. So today on the podcast, we have a very special guest. We have John Jewett. So John is an educator, he's a coach, registered dietitian, and pro bodybuilder. So thank you very much for coming on to the podcast today, John. There is going to be many people who don't know who you are. So obviously me and Lawrence do. Would you be able to educate the people on who is John Jewett?
Well, I'd have to disagree. Everyone knows who John Jewett is. So, yeah, my humble introduction, right? Thank you guys both for having me on. It's flattering. I know you have a strength-based audience, which powerlifting is at my core, my background. So cool to kind of circle back around and talk about it. So with that being said, yeah, I started powerlifting because I was naturally catered to being strong and got into it just with a group of older guys at a gym. And so we didn't have it in our schools or anything. I saw they did have powerlifting in some of our other schools around Texas, which I was completely jealous, but we were a football school, so we didn't have room for other things like that. So yeah, progressed up through powerlifting. I did that for like 8 years and got to a point where I achieved some records. I was beating some of plenty of personal bests. It just got to a point where I was kind of met the strength goals and this wasn't exciting anymore. Also, I wanted to look jacked and not just be strong, because people would guess, be like, hey, aren't you in the 198 class? I'm like, no, I'm 220. And you'd be like, damn it. Like, why do I still look like I'm not big? And so, well, anyway, I always had an interest in bodybuilding, got into that. Been doing that now for 9 years. So I've just been lifting. I guess that makes me feel really old. I've been lifting for a while. And yeah, turned pro in 2016 at the NPC USAs. I've done, I want to say 11 pro shows now and 3 Olympias, with the best placing being 4th at the Olympia. So yeah, been in the iron game for a bit. Now I'm getting more into education. So I have J3 University, which is kind of my curriculum course to take anyone from beginners or even I have lots of pros in it to learn how to do the whole process of nutrition, training, and progressing that through a whole off-season prep scheme. So that's where I've kind of been transitioning more into the education sector since I've been lifting for ever now. I might need something else outside of bodybuilding to do for a career.
I have the applied hypertrophy access, and that is very good. I have to say it's very, very interesting, and I like the kind of breakdown of the application of anatomy to actual exercise, getting a deeper understanding of exercise, which I suppose is something we're probably going to get into today. What are you going to say, Lawrence?
Oh, no, I was just saying maybe John might get into something artistic like painting or.
Is it you can make money doing it? I guess. Yeah, about the applied hypertrophy module, I think I nerd out so much on movement mechanics. I think because I maybe come from powerlifting and looking at powerlifting, we're always trying to optimize how to move the most efficiently possible, point A to point B, right? In bodybuilding, that people don't think in that same sense. They're just kind of almost this afterthought of hey, yeah, I got a pump and I did this type of exercise, but they're not really breaking down video in their lifts like a powerlifter would do, looking at movement mechanics. We could do the same thing in bodybuilding and looking at where does this muscle function, origin to insertion? Am I taking it through that full range of motion, setting myself up in an alignment pattern that allows me to still produce tension on the intended muscle group? And I think a lot of times we don't do that in bodybuilding. So there is a crossover of application and assessing your patterns, but the intention behind it's a little bit different, right? Powerlifting, you're trying to lift the heaviest load possible as efficiently as possible. In bodybuilding, it's kind of the opposite. You want to be almost inefficient and find the most challenging way to lift a load. And that load is kind of irrelevant as long as you're getting good tension in the intended muscle group. So it's a different outcome and input, but the same thought process of assessment. So I think, so if we're, I know this conversation, we're heading into hypertrophy for powerlifting, right? And I think that same thought process goes in when we're thinking about exercise selection But I know we'll get there before we jump ahead, right?
I think it's kind of good place to go from though, because like obviously while within powerlifting, like powerlifters are very specific on the 3 lifts and breaking them down. I do think sometimes the same kind of breakdown to the rest of the program can contribute to, you know, their actual power lifts, because like we had Eric Helms on the last podcast and he was discussing on how, you know, at the higher levels, muscle mass does tend to be something that separates the strongest from the not so strong. So we know that, okay, with the power lifts, we can develop certain muscle groups, and maybe if we have accessories on top of that, we can make them better. Like now, well, then what with our accessories do we need to focus on? Like what are the things that we need to focus on within those accessories to make them effective?
Yeah, so I guess you have to scale back and look at the hypertrophy application to a powerlifter, right? Because that's just one aspect that could be a contributor to strength outcome. Mm-hmm. Hypertrophy is different. It's you know, you might get stronger, but you might not necessarily gain size. But yeah, if you have increase in muscle size, that could produce more force, but you need it specific in powerlifting across tissues that are going to be contributing to your main lifts. And so that's where you might have lifts that could have great application for hypertrophy, but that might not have carryover into strength outcomes for these compound lifts. And that, I think that's what differentiates the programming a lot in bodybuilding to powerlifting is that aspect that you also need a carryover to strength in your primary lifts. With bodybuilding doesn't really matter. The strength is there. It's like an outcome of just getting bigger. But in powerlifting, we need an exercise for one that is specific for the muscle group you want to bring up, but also would be contributory to the compound lift. And so I think that is kind of where like 2 easy check boxes is if you're having good exercise selection. So when I start like programming anything, whether it's bodybuilding, it's like, what do you need? The basic needs assessment. So for a strength athlete, what do you need to get bigger to produce more strength? Like, is it in your squat, or is it your deadlift sucks, or your bench press? Okay, why? Is it you need more tricep, or do you need more hamstring? Like what is the weak link in that segment to where we need to get specific on? And I think finding those specifics. So yeah, I have this massive chest and I get stuck at the lockout. Okay, well, that probably makes sense. You probably need more tricep development. How do we structure around hypertrophy training to bring up muscle mass in those areas? But you can do that for all muscle groups. But I think in powerlifting, we're going to be fairly focused on which body parts we want hypertrophy in, right? Hamstrings, glutes, erectors, chest, triceps, maybe some quads. But as far as like, oh yeah, we want massive side delts and calves, like, it looks cool, but probably won't do anything for you, especially if you're weight class specific. Then that is just extra tissue that you're carrying. And when I powerlifted, I would always see these like really jacked guys, look like bodybuilders, come in like, holy crap, this guy's gonna smoke me, right? And then he's like totally weak. I'm like, what the fuck? Like I barely look like I'm strong. People saying I'm 20 pounds lighter than I am. So it's like, yeah, so you got to make sure that you are specific in your programming. And I think that gives us some framework around, okay, we have XYZ body part that are weak. We need to make those stronger. Then what lifts are going to be contributing to hypertrophy outcome and then also carry over to strength. And I think that kind of starts that conversation of selecting exercises. Then how you structure this all out and build it in is going to vary, because a lot of guys are coming from probably fairly relatively low volume, high loading programs. Do you want to jump into a program that's like 20 sets per muscle group and be wrecked the first week? Probably not. So there's going to be, like we mentioned, there's going to be a fatigue management side, but I think the initial building is like selecting the exercises, right? And looking at where you're coming from. So you already have a program you're running, build off that to make it more hypertrophy focused.
Yeah. So with that then, like obviously you talk about the stimulus a lot in the applied hypertrophy section of your website. So And then you also discussed at the start that you weren't simply just looking at moving weights from A to B and like the bodybuilding training, making the training a bit more inefficient. So while that may be inefficient, it's still providing a good stimulus for that. So like what would make a stimulus decent for hypertrophy?
Yeah, I mean, the main driver of this stimulus in hypertrophy, it still looks like it's just tension, mechanical tension, bone to bone, fiber level tension. So I don't want anyone to misconstrue that and think that that means external load, because it doesn't always mean a heavier load. If you're lifting it more efficiently, it might be less tension at the fiber level. So when we say like mechanical tension is the driver of hypertrophy, we're saying at the fiber level. And so we have mechanoreceptors that can recognize this tension development, and that causes this cascade of great events that happen that then would signal into like protein synthesis and adding more fiber and increasing muscle cell size. Now, there is some other potential drivers for hypertrophy. And now, whether there's side effects of tension, it might be, because some people say there's a level of muscle damage that occurs. So I used to hear like, you break down muscle tissue, then you got to rebuild it, right? That's why you're sore. It's like, that's simply overstated. Like, potentially tension is still the main mechanism, but as a result of putting tension on fibers is they break down and you have soreness occur. The same with like cell volume and pump. Some people say pump, metabolic stress, that could be a stimulus on its own for hypertrophy. But if you're increasing tension on a muscle, over contractions, getting close proximity failure, and a side effect of this is metabolite accumulation, cell swelling, and pump. So is it the pump, or is it still the tension on the muscle? So you can separate these all out. Like, you see programs that are like, this is like my metabolic, week, and this is now my tension week. And I think it's chasing kind of the wrong variables of what causes hypertrophy and trying to separate them out into a program. It's like all these things are occurring within one, but still tension is number one. Now with just bodybuilding training, like you said, yes, it's about getting tension on the muscle and also kind of limiting tension elsewhere. And then the loading is what it is. But with powerlifting, you still want tension on the muscle. But I think the caveat to that is that you do want to be getting stronger very intentionally over time. And that loading needs to increase. So if you're entering into a hypertrophy program and your loads are going down, you're getting weaker, like, red flag, you're doing powerlifting wrong. Like, you absolutely need to be getting stronger. And so with hypertrophy training, how do you get tension in the muscle if we know this is kind of our main mechanism? And hypertrophy is a pretty forgiving adaptation. So as long as you're kind of within this 5 to like really 20 rep range in close proximity to failure, you're getting a high degree of tension. The lower rep ranges, you get high amount of tension kind of right away. You won't need as many reps. The higher rep ranges, you'll probably have to get closer to that proximity of failure, and you're having to do more reps to do so. And so that's really how we're driving this tension within. I think how you put that in context for powerlifting is that, okay, you still need this somewhat proximity to failure, but we want it load specific for powerlifting. Because in bodybuilding, we might use up to 20 reps and it could cause just as good hypertrophy. Mm-hmm. But in powerlifting, going to like doing sets of 20 and then trying to go back to doing your sets of 3, for one, that's a huge change in loading patterns, but also you still want to keep it specific for your ultimate goal of getting strong. So I think where most of someone's work rep range would want to be would probably be in that 5 to 10 mark of for hypertrophy training, to where you're still doing enough reps to where there's like adequate, like if you want to call them stimulating reps present, but also it's not so low to where you're not getting enough volume in, or so high to where you're driving a lot of fatigue and you're also getting far away from the training specificity of strength. So I think that's where we build in some of the criteria of what rep range target we should be around, but also I don't think we should be moving still in like what I'm talking about in the hypertrophy module, which you brought up was, just as long as you're hitting the intended muscle, kind of doesn't matter. Even if it's going super slow cadence, well, that kind of impacts strength, right? So I think you should still have a powerlifter mindset for your compound movements, still move with under control and have that same pattern there. But then when you're moving to your kind of more hypertrophy focused movements, yeah, you still want them under control. So where there's specific stimulus for the muscle groups you want to improve on. Let me put this in context so it's not all up in the clouds. So if you had like your deadlift day, your pull session, whatever you want to call it, and you deadlift, we're going to do sets of 5 for your main compound movement. That way you still have some loading present. Then maybe you move into, like, since it's your deadlift day, maybe you're going to have now a squat pattern that's be higher in rep range. So now we're going to move to doing maybe 8 to 12 on some type of, maybe it's a single leg squat or a front squat. And then we'll have like some other accessory movements that follow. And so that would be how you could structure that to where you still have like some high loading in a primary movement, same type of pattern, but then we move into some other hypertrophy rep ranges, but that lifts that still have carryover to your main lifts. I just talked for a long time, so just stop me too. If I just keep on blabbing on, stop me.
No, an awful lot of it. Everything you said there made perfect sense. It was just nice hearing you talking about it. But I think what a study by Brad Schoenfeld kind of came to mind there when you were talking about the differences in like training style and hypertrophy. That I think definitely one thing people should be mindful of is that training volume, I suppose we know, is a large precursor to hypertrophy, and that study I kind of think of is where he compared volume equated powerlifters to bodybuilders. I think much of the exercise selection was the same in the study, but it was that the total tonnage over the week was similar, and there was negligible differences in I think quad hypertrophy. So like you said, the overall stimulus is kind of the important thing. And I think you kind of highlight an important thing there, that when we are doing our accessories in powerlifting, it's not just about moving weight from A to B the way it has to be in control, but we do know with concentric contractions that we do know when we do them in a explosive manner or with intent, I suppose, as the kids in the street now call it, but moving the weight with intent to try and create those adaptations at a neuromuscular level rather than moving weight just slowly. So again, it's just going back to the principles of training, that the specificity of the accessories have to meet the actual demands or the specific demands of powerlifting.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, because you can easily move into all your accessory movements with that same intention that you might be executing your squat or deadlift with to just blow through the concentric and not have much of an eccentric, which with hypertrophy training, it does tend to look like the eccentric part of lift. It is a large contributory factor to hypertrophy, and concentric only training isn't that great for hypertrophy. So you definitely want to be able to own and have control over the eccentric, and not just moving to get to the concentric to press up or squat up or whatever you're doing, yank it off the ground. So there's a level of control that needs to happen there, and keep an intention within the target muscle that you're training. And so I think that's some slight hypertrophy application within that. I think you brought up a good point too about volume. And because we know the adaptation for strength is very load specific, right? You need to use more load to get stronger. And it seems like although the mechanism is mechanical tension and hypertrophy, the dosage seems to be volume. And the volume can be, it's a tough one. I know there's a huge battle around all this about volume. What is a hard set, and how do you define that? It's going to be different across the application, right? Whether it's how close to failure you are, your intention within it. But anyway, with hypertrophy training, it does appear that if all things are equated, volume dosage up to a point, the more volume done could create greater hypertrophy outcomes. And we've seen studies with this comparing different volume levels, and the strength outcomes could be the same across all groups, but if the higher volumes groups tend to have more muscle growth. And of course, this is up to a point. I don't say jump into the highest volume program, because we already talked about this. It's build upon where you're coming from. So if you're a powerlifter coming from your normal strength progression, I don't know what phase you're coming off of, but maybe you already had some type of deloading session. You're now going to move into a hypertrophy session. You should have some type of introductory week of an increase in volume, which that would prime you to moving forward. So then you could incrementally increase volume over your weeks of training, which would make a lot of sense. Because what you wouldn't want to do as a powerlifter would be to have whatever you're doing, 5 sets a week of a say quads, and then jump into 10 sets your first week. You'd be hammered, right? And you'd probably be more than you could recover from. Then what do you do the next week? And so that's what we're always setting up for training, is you need to be able to do enough in one session, but also have in mind that you're going to need to be able to train again the next week or the next X days. So it would be mindful of, if you have a set plan of what you're doing volume wise already in powerlifting, to make maybe a 20% increase in volume as an introductory week to ramping up volume, run that, assess, and then keep potentially moving up on our target groups that we might need. Now, that might not be the case, okay? So you might have a 20% increase in volume and just be able to hold there for a whole block. I guess that gets into how long should a block be for a powerlifter and for hypertrophy. And it probably comes down for your needs analysis. How beginner are you? How much muscle mass do you need? How close to your weight cap are you? Then when's your next powerlifting meet? So with all those things considered, that kind of gives you an idea of a timeline of what a massing hypertrophy phase might be. And I think you need a reasonable amount of time, which I think anything less than 8 weeks is probably a little short for a hypertrophy block. And those blocks might be broken down into 2 blocks. It might be, a 3-week accumulation, 1-week deload, 3-week accumulation, 1-week deload. You might run it all the way. It's really, there's a lot of free range of what you could do within that. But what we should be seeing over that block is, if you have your exercises picked, you have this volume starting point, that there probably should be definitely a load progression focus throughout the block, and not necessarily rep progression focus. And so if I've given you hey, we should probably stay within this 5 to 10 range. Some exercises aren't going to be great for 5 to 10. If say you were doing a side delt raise for a set of 5, that kind of sucks. And you don't, it just hurts your shoulder joint. So some lifts just cater well to certain rep ranges. But what we would want to do is over that block, we wouldn't want to focus just on rep progression, because we might be gaining more work capacity, but that's not specific to the powerlifter's needs, right, of strength. We would probably be increasing load over the block as a primary focus of progression, maybe some rep progressions too. But then also, if, hey, I get a little bit of pump, I'm not sore, I'm feeling amazing, well, maybe you could do an extra set, and then maybe you have a set progression that takes place. And then so over this course of this block, we're seeing load increase, maybe a few rep progressions, maybe some set progressions, up into a point where you're wow, man, I don't think I can do another week. I'm almost stagnant on training. Fatigue feels high. You have to do something about it. Let's deload, rinse and repeat that process. Then we start back the new block with maybe a little more load than that previous starting point. Assess how that volume level was. If you felt man, no, that was perfect. I hit my accumulation block, needed to deload. All right, well, you can run the same type of volume level. If you're you got to your block, you're I could have probably done more in the XYZ muscle group or lift. We'll run that block and increase volume in that area. But I think that's a generalized idea of how we should be progressing the block for a hypertrophy focused powerlifter. Rather in bodybuilding, man, I could just do rep progressions with the same load and it would have just fine outcome for hypertrophy, but it might not be that great for strength progression. So.
No, there was some very pragmatic advice in that, I think. One thing I think you said that definitely resonates with me when I'm programming or doing my own programming is, you said one thing, that certain exercises lend themselves towards higher rep ranges or lower rep ranges. And I think that's really important for powerlifters to kind of get.
Yeah.
The last thing we're going if you were to look at it, okay, lacking muscle mass in the squat, your initial thought would be sets of 20 on squats. Let's pound this. We're gonna just throw the kitchen sink at squats. But we do know with the amount of, I suppose, axial loading, spinal loading going through that, the actual cognitive load of having to do sets of 20, 4 sets of 20 or 5 sets of 20 in squats, and then obviously the load on the overall body, probably just longitudinally not a good, or even short term not a good idea. But I think that's where powerlifters can really make good and effective use of machines. And I think that maybe that's coming into maybe a nice segue into the actual exercise selection thing. And I go on.
Sacrilege.
Yeah, but it's true, because like, I mean, how many like a lot of powerlifting gyms maybe were limited on machines, or maybe they might have a dusty cable stacked in the corner or whatever. But I think powerlifters using machines can definitely one make so I think maybe that's kind of a segue into that. And I definitely like to hear about your own powerlifting. Like, what did you do for accessories? What was your kind of, I know you had a fairly ridiculous bench at one stage as well, which I'm sure you kind of had your own. You did lift equipped for a while, so I suppose maybe that might have influenced your accessory choice. Obviously, you would have been probably heavily tricep dominant in that. So there was about 10 questions in there, John. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So when when I powerlifted, I started really young. So I was 16 when I started, and I knew nothing. And I got with some guys that were really strong, and they were basically, we were kind of like the bros of powerlifting, I guess, right? Didn't have nearly the information that we have now on, you know, what is even a science-based approach. It was like, just come in every day and lift heavy. And then we kind of got catered into like the West Side barbell scene and introduced that, because where you would learn would we just go to meets, and you talk to people at meets, and they're like, oh yeah, have you read this document, and I'll fax it to you. And so like, I remember we got a fax of like the West Side barbell method, right? And so this was like our sources of information. It just I would do it so differently. So I would even say like, oh yeah, you know, do this from when I was strong. Like I would do it differently, but nonetheless, like genetics are going to be heavily weighed into all these bodybuilding and powerlifting. So if you have someone that just trains hard and lifts heavy enough, like it's going to get them pretty damn far. It might not be like the smartest approach or the optimal approach, but end outcomes, you might get pretty far in it. And I did. And so like, yeah, so I catered a lot to doing like the West Side barbell. We would have like kind of a max effort day, followed by accessory work. Then there would be a speed day, followed by some other accessory work in those days. Still had a squat and a deadlift day. Deadlift day would follow with more accessory work for like the squat, and vice versa on the squat day. Yeah, I would have done it differently, but I did compete equipped for. That's how I was introduced to it, and that was like the really hot thing back in like the early 2000s when I got into it. Was everyone was using bench shirts, so it's like, well, this is how you powerlift. I didn't even think about doing it raw because it wasn't even happening. I think there was like maybe one organization, no one was like going to it that I knew of. Yeah. But I got introduced to it because I was really good at bench. And that's the guys I met happened to only be bench only guys. So I don't even know if you would squat, bench, deadlift. And we were all single ply going through USAPL. So I never actually did a raw meet. I always did them single ply. And I did decent. I think my best total was like 1820, 634 bench, 617 squat, 606 deadlift. My best bench solo though was a 706. Nice. That was at 220. So
nice. Very nice.
But anyway, yeah, training was specific then. So I was like a lot of like tricep work, board presses for lockout because of the strength curves around around bench strength. So, I mean, I don't know how that is even.
You started talking and you just said, that's not the way I do it now. So kind of talk us through that. If you were, let's say you could go back to little 16-year-old John and he was just finished off his bench session and he's about to start his accessories.
Yeah, so it would be hopefully I caught him before he hit his bench work, but basically, yeah, the main issue I think around when I was doing it was probably driving way too much fatigue and digging a hole in one day systemically, because I did get to a point where I got strong on all lifts and I wasn't getting any stronger, and there just wasn't progression happening, and there started to be injuries happening, and that was, I think, the big limitation. And my issue was having these max effort days that weren't only like max effort in loading, but also in effort. So relative and absolute. And so we were taking lifts to like failure, as heavy as you go, like singles and triples. And man, the connective tissue, the local fatigue that would occur there, the systemic fatigue, it was completely unsustainable. Luckily I was in my 20s and like, you can still survive. I don't know what would happen if I was now like being 35 trying to do this, because I'm already still working around trying to make loads as hard as possible. So that would be part of my advice is like, thank goodness that like RPE and RIR are a thing now. And like, hey, you just have to lift heavy loads. You don't have to go to failure. That would be a programming approach I absolutely would use, would be on my compound lifts, staying a certain proximity away from failure and still having the idea of just, hey, progressing strength over the course of weeks. We also did not have a way of progression that was pre-planned. So it was very much kind of on the fly, take everything on the table you got for the day. So if you're really strong that day, lay it all out, right? So if it's like a 30-pound PR, awesome. What do you do next week? Oh man, I lost 20 pounds off my bench. It's like, yeah, you're an idiot. So I would have definitely had a rate of progression that would have been probably RPE based, and that load would be dictated around that RPE or a stop point at that RPE, with slight load progressions over weeks. That actually having deloads, because a lot of times we didn't even do that. We just keep training.
very unintentional auto-regulation there.
Yeah. And bodybuilding's like that too, because I think it's kind of come full circle, because I got into bodybuilding coming from a powerlifting background where normally you'd have great programming, right? And we kind of got into it at the tail end. So I had that in mind going into bodybuilding, to have like this kind of programming like a powerlifter. But it's easy in bodybuilding to where you see most bodybuilding routines aren't programmed in any sense at all. But you still see guys get to really high levels. Kind of goes back to my point that, hey, genetics and you train better. And so now in bodybuilding, I kind of have a similar programming approach that you might see in powerlifting with blocks and almost pre-planned progressions, but it's still very intuitive just because of where I'm at now in my lifting career. I think from a beginner that might be helpful, but at least now there's a lot of intuition that just comes into my progressions that I take in training. But yeah, definitely those would be the main ones looking back, would be not training to failure, all my sessions, and then having a rate of progression that was somewhat pre-programmed, then also taking deloads.
Good. Excellent. I think that's so
very mature advice.
Yeah.
That was a young man lifting then. It's just all in, man. Like, which I got into power. It's funny. I got into power bodybuilding, looking at elite FTS, and there were some articles written by like Justin Harris, and that was coming from DC training, which had this like very focus on load progression, rep progressions, which I'm like, I love this. It's perfect. It's an easy transition for powerlifting, but I was still like going all out to failure. And from a powerlifting mindset, when you know how to grind reps, which is cool because I learned that, I had that in me to take that into bodybuilding. Like I already knew how to train hard, but it quickly led to a place of chasing the wrong things, because I'm still chasing load when I should have been doing it now, where I'm chasing the intention is standardized, and then I let that strength rise organically through that versus chasing strength session to session.
Yeah, like strength is I suppose the effect or a side effect of the primary
Exactly. Yeah. Like you gave a stimulus and now you adapted and you can express that strength versus you have to go into a session to try to force strength to happen and then cause a stimulus. Like, no, that's thinking the opposite way. It's an explanation you see guys make, but it's just a kind of a flip on how you're thinking about that process. So you shouldn't be chasing the logbook in bodybuilding. We're using the logbook as a more of an assessment tool and tracking progress over time. But in powerlifting,
that was a very good post you up there recently. Actually, I think you put it up on Instagram.
Yeah.
About the logbook. Like a lot. I think I followed you for a long time. A lot of the posts you put up are excellent, but the logbook I think rings true, particularly I suppose in bodybuilding now, because I think a lot of people have kind of like, I suppose I'm just saying this in defense, I'm not a bodybuilder, but it kind of, if you were to look from the outside, and it does kind of look like it's kind of became trendy, I suppose, to pull 6 plates off the floor and squat 5 plates and bench 3 plates for reps. But I suppose that's not the goal for your bodybuilding training to become powerlifting centric or strength centric, I suppose.
No, that's right. And it's a very tough one to explain to people. Because over time, if you get bigger, you should be getting stronger. But then people flip that. Well, if I get strong, I'm going to be big. It's like, no, not quite, but it's easy. And if you start changing that type of progression in bodybuilding, to just alter your lifts to become a power builder, right? So you just become efficient lifting heavy loads. Then it's really doing the opposite, that you really want, like, at least in my mind, you using the least load possible to produce the stimulus. And then when I will progress that load up, but it's going to be organically because I have to. Otherwise, I'd be doing this weight that was just way too easy, way far from failure. Like, I will have to progress the load to keep up with the adaptation, but I won't be progressing the load to make the adaptation. And so, yeah, like if I had to, like, I'm using way less weight. Like if you saw me squat the other day, it was pathetic. And you'd say, like, John, how do you even have like 30-inch quads? I was safety bar squatting 275. And like, yeah, I've squatted over 600 pounds, but my quads are the best they've been. So, yeah, you just, for me, it's trying to get the most from the least and then moving up as needed. Same with anything regarding bodybuilding or, food or PEDs or whatever that may be.
Yeah.
You don't want to be advanced, right? You'll become advanced, but you don't want to be like jump into the advanced routine right away. Like milk everything at the early levels and move up kind of as needed and get as much progress from that, then move up from there. But yeah, no, you're completely right. It has gotten a little bit, power building is sexy in bodybuilding, right? So like pulling heavy weights and being strong, like, hey, it's really cool to watch. You just have to, is it specific to your goal? And I think as you get advanced in power bodybuilding, like those big lifts are kind of a shotgun blast of stimulus to a lot of areas. And if you're advanced, you probably need to be very specific in where you're bringing stimulus to. Powerlifting, we're still trying to train movement patterns, but there's still muscle groups that make those movement patterns happen. So we're now picking exercises that are along the similar basis of movements, but we can break down into those muscle patterns and look at function. So let me talk about what the hell I'm saying here is like, so if, you need to bring up your deadlift and maybe hamstrings are like a lagging part, should we pick leg curls as our mode of creating hypertrophy? It's like there's not too many times and situations where you're standing at a powerlifting meet and you're required to bend at the knee and curl a weight up, right, with your leg. It's like, well, no, maybe that not be the best application for high hamstring hypertrophy in a powerlifter. Bodybuilder, yeah, that could be awesome, right? So maybe that's now implementing, okay, we want some stiff leg deadlifts present, controlled, right? And then we could have that programmed in because now that has some type of carryover in a movement pattern specific to deadlift. But it's also biased towards hamstring hypertrophy over, say, glute, which maybe your glutes suck. And so, okay, well, we could do like a RDL and push the hips back in a pattern like that. And so then we could put more bias to like glute hypertrophy in that sense. So I think that's some of that, you know, exercise programming that we talk about, of like what movements should we be bringing in, and it should be ones that's have that carryover to your main lifts. Just to give like, I guess, a breakdown, because you asked me, Lawrence, of like how I would do it. You know, looking back programming wise, to give you some type of example, do y'all follow like a 3 days on or like a 4 days per week type training split?
We both are probably following a very close training program. So
we're members of a cult.
Yeah, it's a powerlifting cult here in Ireland, I suppose, would be the way of describing it. So our training program at the moment, to be, you know, Shane's about 2 weeks out from a meet, but generally on season or off season, you're talking 4-day training split with squat 3 times a week frequency, deadlift at twice a week frequency, and bench usually at 3-day frequency, and you might have a 4th day of pressing there as well. Typically the squat volume can vary anywhere from 8 to 16 sets a week. The deadlift volume usually starting at 6 or 8, working up to, I've seen people up to maybe 8 or 12 in the bench volume. Shane can probably attest to this now, because he's doing it's like a Smolov for bench, I suppose. I don't know if you're acquainted with the Russian squat cycle, but it's almost 30. It's a bench version of that, but there's about 32 sets of bench a week.
Yeah, no, that's dirty, guys. That's not right. That's wrong. It's evil, is what I mean. Like, yeah, it can be pretty brutal. No, that's very insightful. Like, that's the thing. There's lots of different ways to program this out. Like, if you were doing, it's nearly almost full body, right? Because you're pulling, squatting, you're benching. At least your squat, your bench is like 3 days a week. You're pulling like twice a week. So I mean, you could program something out like that to where you still have, I mean, because you couldn't do that many sets and jump into now doing sets of 5 to 10. You probably have to scale back that volume, right? But you could do the same type of programming, if that's what you would prefer, where you'd have you work up to a squat set of like a 5, but you're not going to do now like 6 sets of 5 from what you're doing. Maybe if you're been doing 6 sets of singles or something. So if it's load specific, you still can have that strength like adaptation by working up to a set of 5, but then you could have a back down set and load, and having some higher rep work within the same movement pattern, or an alteration to that movement pattern, to where you can have some hypertrophy stimulus occur. So maybe that is, you work up and you do like a couple sets of 5 on your squat, then you move to like your leg press or a hack squat, and then do some sets of 8 to 12 to drive in some higher rep range work and get some hypertrophy stimulus there. I've seen even some programs where you still work up to like a triple or a single, far from failure. The load is specific. Then the rest of your sessions are sets that are in that 5 to 10 rep range, which there's not really a wrong. There's several rights to do it. Within that, there's definitely some wrongs you could pick out, but I think either way, if you were to pick it, you could justify it. I think I still had preference to doing like a push pull legs type of rotation, to where, and that's just me, a preference. So it'd have like, you know, your squat day, and then you'd have like deadlift hypertrophy work, right? And then you'd have your deadlift day, then squat hypertrophy work. You'd have a bench day, which would have, you know, maybe that would be more of you could have one day that would be like a chest focused hypertrophy with some back work. The other day would be a lighter bench day, but then with tricep focused hypertrophy work and some back work. So like there's different ways you could structure, but even if you're doing some full body split in powerlifting, you could do it where you have top sets and back off sets to drive more volume.
I think one of the things you're touched on there is quite important in regards to like using similar kind of movement patterns to the one you are trying to train, because obviously it is going to be like movement specific powerlifting.
Right.
But I suppose touching on something that Lawrence said a while ago in regards to how powerlifters can maybe use machines, maybe not use barbells for everything, because like obviously with the movement pattern based exercises, with the barbell, like there's a lot of other things that we're going to be training, maybe higher degree of fatigue may come with them. So using something like a machine, which may offer like more ability to be stabilized, we can maybe push our muscles a bit closer to the point of failure with a bit more stability, under less fatigue, like those can be very beneficial for the powerlifter as well.
No, you're absolutely right. And later in the later stages of workout, when you have starting to accumulate fatigue, your ability to internally brace can get diminished, and also just neurologically, from a focus standpoint, your ability to execute lifts precisely can get diminished, which could lead you to more susceptibility of injury. But with lack of that internal bracing, you could have less output within the target muscle group, or less tension, less stimulus, however you would want to term it. So I think it would make a lot of sense for moving to movement patterns that are more internally braced to more externally braced. So moving from like a squat pattern to like a leg press pattern, but it could be still similar. It's still movement specific, right? Like we kind of know, like as long as you have that movement that is like a squat and free weight based, you can keep a good that adaptation present. But then moving to a machine would be perfectly acceptable. I think if you're only doing machines, it's gonna be really hard to go back to that free bar based pattern. So it should still have that as a basis, but as your first lift in exercise order, that would be dictated on what we want specific for powerlifting. So moving from your squat, deadlift, or bench press in a free weight to more stabilized patterns, to then more isolation based patterns. But I think there's some really cool machines out there that even cater really well for powerlifting application. One idea would be like the Prime or Strive equipment, where you can alter loading patterns. For one, you're kind of like creating more tension. You're matching the strength and resistance profiles really well, kind of like what we do with bands and chains. But you can also do that with those machines. So if, like, say, the Prime pressing machine, if you needed more triceps, well, you could overload the tricep lockout portion a little bit more on those machines, which would have some benefit in training and still checking off all the hypertrophy blocks as well. So I think you're also going to be able to, like you mentioned, is managing systemic fatigue throughout your session. So if you're doing all free weight based movements, like at some point, you're just going to be driven like into the ground and not be able to give enough direct stimulus to one specific muscle group. So it's a good way to, like, the term is from Mike Israetel, like this, at least that I know of, like the stimulus to fatigue ratio. So you're trying to manage that fatigue, but still get enough stimulus. And so we're having to get to that more externally braced type movement patterns. And that could drive up your volume as a powerlifter by not having to take away so much from the demands that are driving up from like your free base pattern. So if we know volume is a big thing for dosing on hypertrophy, well, one way to really get a little bit more volume in is have some more externally braced movements in machines. But again, like you said, those machines should still be movement specific for powerlifting. So still pressing based, still
the tier of priorities, at least, where if we're powerlifting, look, that's up there, that's number one. But then obviously hypertrophy, if that is your weak link, like you said earlier on the podcast, your hypertrophy work, your accessory work should nearly go down in its specificity as the training session goes on. So let's say your squat work, I don't know, let's just use the squat here as an example, because I suppose that's probably an easy one. Your squat work, maybe your single leg squat work, maybe you're doing some unilateral work, maybe you're doing some front squats, and then finally, then let's say your leg presses, and then almost at the end of that, your pure isolation work, your leg extensions. I think maybe that's a practical way of breaking down maybe what you said, is it?
Yeah, no, I think so. That definitely, and I still like programming my bodybuilding like that, moving from a unbraced compound movement to more braced to isolation if I need more stimulus within that. So for powerlifting, just like you said, I mean, you're moving from a barbell bench press to some type of maybe machine chest press, to maybe you have another slight different angle or variation. Maybe it's you're going to move from a machine flat base press to like a JM press for like tricep focus as well. Then maybe you have some isolation work that you have in place. You can still have some isolation work like a push down. Yeah, it's not going to carry much over. But again, it's driving in more stimulus for growth and a very, very low fatigue cost. So it's kind of, if you do need more to drive more stimulus for that session and you can't handle more systemically, more sets on your bench press, well, let's put some on like some very little non-taxing movements. Maybe that's even having a fly. Hey, you need some more chest work, but man, I can't handle any more compound pressing. There's no way. Well, maybe you can just handle like a set of flies, and you could structure it that way. So yeah, I think thank you for summarizing my my rambling on into some type of framework there to use.
Oh, definitely not a ramble. I suppose one thing you're kind of repeatedly saying, and I'm kind of interested to hear it, is you're even in the way you program now and a lot of the mistakes you would have made earlier on in your training. You obviously did get something from powerlifting, I suppose. You built a strong strength base. You obviously fell in love enough with training for it to be your career, based around your career. I mean, your career is ultimately based around lifting iron. So I mean, what was it about that early exposure? Is there any one singular thing about that early exposure to resistance or strength training or powerlifting that kind of ignited that flame or kind of resulted in you kind of saying, do you know what, this is something I could do for a while?
I think it's tough because I started lifting really young. I was in 6th grade and just given my first, like, just a bench on its own to train. But I always had an interest in it, just muscle and the look. I think at first it was just more of this young guy in middle school wanting to get more muscular, try to be more, from a lower level of status level,
Yeah. I know we've all been there.
Still
there.
You kind of get into it from there, but then it becomes more, because that doesn't last. That won't carry you all throughout. Especially like if you're in your, like, I'm 35, like, I don't care what most people, I have a small group of who I care about what they think about me. So a status doesn't really matter. But what it did become was that I loved the ability to chase self-development. And it was having to be very introspective as well, I guess, along the process. It's not just what I did in the gym. It was everything. It was how I thought about things, my mindset, recovery in that regard. It was everything that I could do to better myself for the iron game. But that in turn kind of like it transpires and transcends into every other aspect of your life. And so it's now this whole like self-development process that leads to this greater potential of yourself, which if you follow like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's self-actualization, which is the highest human need and motive off this scale, of course. So it goes beyond just a status or money. It's a love for something, seeing your passion, and that's what it all became. It was just a better version of myself overall. It was extremely satisfying, and now that's not only for myself. Now it's now impacting others, and that's been an even greater development, because now I do things with a mindset of how can I help other people. And so I've truly found like a passion and something that I believe that I'm meant to be doing. And there's a lot of purpose behind that. So I think that kind of drove my whole process along the way, that I just love the day in and day out of it. And it's leading to this better version of myself. And I think for a lot of people that do listen, I ask people like, what they come to me, they're like, yeah, I want a pro card, John. Like, well, why do you want a pro card? And a lot of people just want this card and an outcome. But the ones that are truly successful have this deeper why behind what they do. So I ask, find your why. What is that deep emotional driver that makes you want to get up and better yourself and find that and chase that down. And maybe that's not a pro card. Maybe it is something else. Don't let it be from a shallow point of like status or money or recognition. It has to be this deep aspect. And that's what it is for me. And so that's what's carried me from powerlifting into bodybuilding. And now I truly connect well with bodybuilding. And that's been more of a successful, aspect for me.
And has
that was very motivating.
Yeah.
Go, let's go.
I've a gym here behind me. I'm just gonna jump off there now and catch you in an hour. But I suppose for you, obviously your background is a dietetics, so you're a dietitian. I'm kind of curious as to what led you into that. I suppose obviously you were peripherally interested in nutrition. I suppose if you're into strength training, most people by proxy, you almost have to be somewhat interested in nutrition to be in some way successful in powerlifting and bodybuilding, obviously.
Bodybuilding.
Yeah, definitely bodybuilding.
Plenty of people are interested in nutrition.
But what kind of got you into dietetics?
So I've always been, I guess, more of the science minded and trying to investigate. And I was curious about a lot of things of how things worked. I always thought if I could understand how something worked, I could better apply it. And I also just didn't want to do things without some level of understanding. So, and then not just being highly competitive within myself. It's like, man, how I eat probably has an impact on my performance, which, in powerlifting, we don't have necessarily diets, but you want to have like a certain amount of protein. You want like a lot of calories in general. So there is some general application there. I didn't have an awesome powerlifting diet, but eventually I did link up in college with some guys that one of them, he had his like Excel spreadsheet of his diet laid out. I'm like, this is so cool. It was like eye-opening me, like how to track this stuff down. Like I wasn't really exposed to that. I would just kind of eat just more intuitively, just eat a lot, right? It wasn't really tracked. So I loved already being on the mindset of kind of wanting to dive into like the more science aspect, to be more meticulous in another way, was easy because I was just that kind of more of that type A, like give me data and I'll just like go wild with it. Right. Which can be negative, tracking too much data. But anyway, so I was starting to follow this very regimented bodybuilding type diet, but had application in powerlifting. So I could change my body weight and have some meticulous way to do so versus just kind of winging it. And also learning more about food science, supplement science along the way. People start asking you a lot of questions like, hey, John's having success. What do you do? I loved explaining and educating people on that aspect. When I was in college, though, we didn't have nutrition. We just had exercise science. And the school that had nutrition, I looked at their program and it was dietetics. So I looked at the courses and it was, food service management. I was like, I don't want to work in a hospital. I don't want to work like, doing in a hotel or we're doing the food service or a kitchen of a hospital. It was clinical. So working with patients, disease states, or it was community nutrition, like all the community programs we have, like the government funded food programs. It's like, that has nothing to do with what I want to do with just getting jacked and swole. So like, I don't want to do that. And I got through my bachelor's in exercise science and I still loved like my exercise nutrition course. That was my thing, learning all the metabolism and just going more in depth. But I got out there like, hey, John, the career market's not great for us as kinesiologists. You basically be a personal trainer, or you could go be a PE coach, or like, this is terrible. Like I need a way to fund my bodybuilding and powerlifting. So that's when I was like, well, what else could I do that's a higher level? There was physical therapy school. I was like, oh, well, there's being a dietitian, which is a stable position. I'd have, I could still work with food and doing diets. I like that enough. I'd have benefits, etc. So I was like, I can still cater my master's degree to nutrition and focus on exercise science. And so that's what I did. And that's how I got into it, because basically I wanted a more stable position with higher income level that I could still do something around what I liked. So I made the sacrifice of like learning all the community and clinical nutrition, but I did my master's thesis around something exercise science based. So that kind of led me into it with hopes of maybe being able to be a sport dietitian, which is like very hard at least in the States to get a position. Yeah. You're the low guy on the totem pole. Usually you're way overworked, understaffed, and underpaid. So it's just like, well, that's not gonna work. So I just started coaching people on my own. And then that just grew and grew and grew to where I'm now, that's where I'm here today doing my own business.
And it's flourishing.
Yeah.
obviously doing fantastic on that you went down that route.
Absolutely. Like I worked clinical for 3 years. I worked on stroke units. I worked on the ICU. I worked on the NICU doing neonatal care. So doing people that were intubated on life support, tube feedings, intravenous feedings. And, I enjoyed that. It was fulfilling in its own sense, but at the same time, it's not, because it's very acute. People come in the door and hopefully they go out the door. Then it's a new rotation of patients. It's kind of monotonous, but it wasn't a love. And what I loved was bodybuilding and helping athletes and that working with that sector. So at some point I just, I had a certain amount of clients. I knew if I got to 30 clients, it would cover my income at the hospital. Yeah. And so I pushed for the life of me, because I had this moment of like, you have to choose. You have to go all in on coaching or go all in the hospital, because I was getting to a point in the hospital where I'm advancing up and I need to like really dive into learning more about management, learn more about ICU care. And I can't just keep learning about bodybuilding, because I need to do this for patients. So it's like in 2 months, I just went all in. I got to 30 clients. I put I put a 1 month notice in because they needed some staffing at the time. I was overly nice. But so I just cut the cord. I just went full off the hospital, and I had like my 30 clients. And that like 10 hours of work that I did for 30 clients was covering my full salary at the hospital, which is phenomenal. But I pictured my life moving up the ranks to where my boss was. And it was terrifying to me to be in that position. Yeah. Not from like a job aspect, but a level of happiness. And so it was an easy decision to like just cut the cord and go all in on something that I loved.
Yeah. I think the last 15 minutes is pretty decent career advice for anybody who is listening as well. Like, because I suppose when people are young, they probably don't know what their passion is, well defined. And then as well for people who are, they're coaching, but they're trying to juggle 2 jobs, it can be very scary for them to make the decision from going from a very stable paid job to going to coaching where you're pretty much just fending for yourself. And doing what you did when you kind of set a kind of baseline or kind of decided on how much money you need to make, how many clients you need to have to make the transition, to make it worthwhile, and then just taking the leap is it's fantastic advice.
Yeah, I think people have to realize too, like with chasing your passion doesn't always mean you're going to be completely happy every day and doing the thing you love. It's going to mean there's going to be a ton of sacrifice to make to eventually get to only doing that passion. Because I had days that like I was miserable having to work at the hospital and then also coach people on the side and I was a pro bodybuilder at the time. So I was trying to be a pro bodybuilder too. It was just wake up and grind, get home, sleep. And I had to really, really grind hard during that time period to now get to a spot where I only do my passion. So if you think you can jump into it, that's not the way it's going to be. There might necessarily be you doing things you don't want to do to get to the spot of what you want to do. And I was also a very planned person. So I'm not a huge risk taker. I like a certain degree of risk, but for me, it's like, I wanted, and this is starting to be like financial advice from a younger point of view, is like, hey, you need 6 months of income present to where you could float yourself if need be, but you at least have, hey, 6 months where I could make this work. Versus I had nothing in the bank and going into like working, cutting my hospital job off. Like I didn't do it like that. Like I had this savings that I worked to cash flow whatever I could. I minimized debt where I could, so that didn't mean you're out of school driving your brand new like Mercedes or whatever you think you can afford. That's like, hey, what cash vehicle can you do so you can make this all work? So I think that's like some advice too, because even back then I did have that savings present, but also I had like a $500 car payment. Like,
yeah,
I could have sacrificed. I could have gotten rid of that. And that's just things that I've learned now. Like minimize debt when you're young, cash flow what you can, everything, honestly. And then once you're in that position, make that move. But set it up at an educated spot. Don't just do it all whimsical. Have some planning in place to protect yourself.
I think what's really really standing out to me in the last couple of conversations we've had with people, I think when I got into lifting and I was about 15, 16, I don't know, maybe you've different experiences now to me, but you're looking at pro bodybuilders or elite powerlifters, I suppose, at the time. And I remember kind of remarking to myself, even at that young age, how few of them would have been from kind of how few of them had like functioning jobs, had responsibilities, had that kind of put in the graft in terms of having an education, having a degree. And in the last couple of podcasts, we've had yourself, we've had Eric Helms, and we've had a couple of other people on, but a lot of the people that are gaining kind of notoriety now, or that people are following, or people like yourself, like Jordan Peters, there's a couple other people come to mind, but they're putting out invaluable information, number one, but they've done it from a perspective that they're very passionate bodybuilders, are very passionate about the sport, but first and foremost, they, I suppose, educated themselves and found a way to make a career out of the thing they love rather than the thing they love being at the center of their existence and being that kind of unidimensional meme almost that it's very easy to fall into. But for anybody, I suppose, even peripherally wanting to make a career out of it, and Shane, in fairness to him, has done really well. Like when you were speaking earlier about being the coach, I was thinking of Shane and Flyfit doing 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week. And he branched off and became a full-time coach recently. That there's a, I suppose, like you said with the exercise selection earlier, it's not there's a right and a wrong way. It's just that there's better ways of doing things, like you outlined earlier. Yeah,
I completely agree. There's always, I have no regrets about how I did things because I'm here now in a great spot. And look back, could have been different. Yeah, potentially. I have advice that I would embark on people because of that. But no regrets as far as where this led me to, though. I think like what you brought up, even when I was looking back at bodybuilding magazines and guys that I would get some inspiration from, it was very it seemed like a very fantasy world. There was really a lack of connection with this bodybuilding world. Like these guys are just, I don't know, flying around and meeting fans, and they're like train when they want, and their food's all prep for them or something. And it was like this different world, and you don't really know the reality of it. And it has changed too, because it used to be like there's a lot less pros. There's very big contracts around. So you actually had guys that was their life. They just got paid to bodybuild. But it's changed a lot now. But also we have a lot more exposure to what is the reality of being a professional bodybuilder, and that it is you do have to make a career around your bodybuilding and find revenues of income, because it's not the same big contracts anymore. And you don't even need to be a pro bodybuilder to get some type of like contract. Just be an influencer. So
just get a nice glute pump, snazzy pair of leggings, a decent Canon DSLR, and you're set.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, use a fake plates. You don't need to be strong.
You need to do away with J3 University and just read boot shorts.
There you go. I'm deleting it today.
Anyway, John, I'm very mindful of your time. It's Monday and you're a busy guy. So have you any closing thoughts or any parts of wisdom that you'd like to leave our listeners with before we close out the podcast?
Well, it stems me back to like my powerlifting background of just patience in programming, and just in general in your powerlifting and bodybuilding journey. I wouldn't have thought when I went back like 10, 12 years when I was powerlifting that I would still be doing this competitively. It was just how many weeks to the next meet, and training with that in mind too. So I think to get really strong, the strongest guys that you see, the biggest guys that you see, have been doing this for several years, and have your programming in mind like that. So there's okay to have days where you take the extra rest day and you have a patient progressive model in place. Over time is where you're going to really see yourself become the best version, whether that's on the powerlifting stage or the bodybuilding stage. And I think that's where I made a lot of mistakes, is not having that patience, even in bodybuilding. And so really, really looking at this long-term, if there's something you truly do love long-term, then it's definitely something to pursue and find other avenues to build career, because it's not just based around someone's going to pay you just to get on stage anymore. So I think always try to look at these short-term goals, of course, but then of course look at the big picture, long-term goals of what we're programming for and what we're doing in our lives.
Fantastic. Would you? So yeah, that was amazing, John. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I'll say there's a lot of people who are going to have massive brains after this, so making strength gains, size gains, and financial gains. Would you like to tell the people where they can find you and learn more about you, and maybe give you some money?
Yes, of course. I'm mainly active on Instagram for social media. So at John Jewett 3, that is my IG. I do have a YouTube. I'm a little less frequent on there, but it's just John Jewett. You'd find me. I do have a podcast as well, J3 University. That's also with Luke Miller as my co-host. So we do a lot of more sciencey, nerdy type talks and hypertrophy training, but very, very practical, application based. So I'm not a total up in the cloud nerd, just a little bit. And then also, if for coaching, I'm not doing really anymore in any one-on-one individual coaching, but more big span. So with my education curriculum, J3 University, you can check that out. We're closed for the rest of the year, but we're going to be opening up January 1st for new student enrollments. And again, that is a full curriculum on how to train, diet, recover, help manage your health, PED application. There's completely transparent of what I use in J3 University. Case studies within that too. So you're not just seeing me doing lectures, you're actually seeing it implied with myself, my wife, clients. And then there's interactive forums too, asking questions. So that's opening up January 1st. So you can check that out if you want to learn a little bit more education-wise and apply it. Amazing. But thank you guys so much for having me on.
Yeah, no problem.
Truly appreciate it.
That was great.
Fast conversation. But yeah, I'll link all of your details in the show notes as well, so people can just click the link and access you. So yeah, I think that pretty much wraps it up. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast as per usual. And if you do want to help support the podcast, you can share the episode on your Instagram or whatever social media you use. Leave us a review, a rating on iTunes or whatever it is. And yeah, we'll catch you in the next one.